What's up, everybody? Some event updates. So we did our first virtual screening this past week, the first virtual screening of Left at Wall, and it went well. So I'm going to be doing more of those. So make sure you're following me online at Ron Placone on all socials, because I'm going to be announcing more virtual screenings. So keep a lookout for that. But physical screenings and events. March 18th, Washington, D.C. That's a free screening of the movie. You can get information on my website, ronplacone.com. March 22nd, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A show, screening, and a Q&A afterwards. Can't wait to see you, Pittsburgh. April 14th, Los Angeles, California. It's going to be a show featuring myself and other members of the cast, a screening and a Q&A after. And June 8th, Idlewild, California. We're going up to the mountains for a show, screening, and Q&A. Tickets and all information at ronplacone.com. Episode 25. Gigi Sohn. Gigi Sohn is an attorney and public advocate. She served on the FCC in the past, and when she was nominated by Joe Biden, many of us were thrilled. She's been a leader, especially when it comes to issues like net neutrality, for many years. A right-wing smear campaign followed her nomination, and after 3 hearings, each more absurd than the last, she had to withdraw. The smears were at worst cruel and homophobic, at best just straight up false. They made her out to be some radical leftist, which, well, it'd be no problem if she was. That's just objectively not true about her. My personal politics are way to the left of Gigi Sohn, but it isn't really all that relevant. If anything, it speaks to how good of a candidate she was, because she had support from all across the political spectrum. It's tragic she's not currently at the FCC. The good news, though, she has a new project that, dare I say, is pretty exciting. Tech policy wonks, rejoice. Please welcome to the show, Gigi Sohn. So Gigi Sohn, thanks for being here. Good to talk to you.
Same here. I'm really excited to talk to you, Ron.
So let's start with a little bit of an origin story. What led you to tech policy? How did you get started in that entire field?
Well, I'm going to date myself, but so what? I started out when I was at Boston University as an undergraduate, and I was studying broadcasting and film with the intention of being a sportscaster. And I just couldn't get rid of my New York accent. So I kind of shifted more towards film, which I was pretty good at, but I'm not the most creative person. I probably would have been good making documentaries, but I started to take broadcasting and cable law classes. And this was really at the dawn of cable. So, and I was really fascinated with the First Amendment implications and the fact that, there's a handful of companies that really controlled what people saw and people heard, and that the public had some rights, but not a lot. In the 80s, when I was in college, they had more rights, frankly, than they have now. So that really kind of is what led me to law school and led me to, communications and tech policy. But again, when I was in college, the internet was probably, just in a bunch of universities just being born, but certainly had no commercial application. So it was all about broadcasting and then cable. And again, which is very top-down command and control. And then the whole world really changed for communications when the internet became a commercial means of communication.
Yeah. So my wife is from Massachusetts. So you mentioned the New York accent. Is it an actual law there that if you have a New York accent, you can't do sports broadcasting in Boston? She might be Yankees. Cut her mic.
I'm a Met fan, so watch out. No, I don't know. I just it just really wasn't for me as much as I kind of, thought about it, all the travel and everything. This wasn't really. And frankly, in those days, like, women really didn't have much of an opportunity to be sportscasters anyway. And I was quite fascinated. I didn't know it at the time, but law really was the right profession for me, like law and policy. I didn't realize it. I should have known all my years of arguing with my parents and my siblings that I would have been very good at it. But I think I found my calling being a lawyer. And again, I haven't really practiced law much of my career, but I've been obviously very involved in policy debates and trying to shape the law and trying to shape policy for the greater good.
Well, how did you end up going in the policy direction then? Like how did that, like, I mean, you mentioned it was interesting to you, but then how did you end up getting in there in a formal capacity?
So I started out as an aviation lawyer. I worked for a medium-sized law firm in Washington, D.C. I can't say I killed it in law school, but when I graduated in the mid-'80s, pretty much everybody, and I went to an Ivy League law school, University of Pennsylvania, so everybody got a job. So I did have a very good summer job with an aviation law firm, and I went back. They made me an offer. They loved me. And I came to not hate the work, but really hate the law firm life. And it's not, I don't want to cast aspersions on the law firm itself, which will remain nameless. There were some wonderful people there. There were also some really awful people. But I just didn't feel like I was finding my purpose. And I had gone to law school with the purpose of being a communications lawyer. So I wanted to change fields, and I wanted to do something that was more purposeful. So I got my job. I was very, very lucky. The job that kind of launched me into communications law and policy. I was interviewing around, and because I was only 2 years out of law school and because I had an Ivy League law degree, I got a lot of interviews. I got an interview with this woman at the Washington, D.C. metro system, the subway system, for a trial lawyer. And she said, well, you're very, very smart. You're very engaging. You're completely wrong for this job. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I really want to be a communications lawyer. And she said, well, have you applied to a place called the Media Access Project, which was the first public interest communications law firm? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I have. And she said, oh, my husband is the executive director. And he had lost, and his name is Andrew J. Schwartzman. He's still doing communications law and policy to this day. And he had lost my resume under a pile of papers. So that kind of got me into public policy litigation, basically challenging broadcast licenses, challenging various and sundry FCC policies on behalf of the public, trying to make broadcasting more open to differing viewpoints, trying to get cable operators to open up their systems to public discussion. That was a tough time. I mean, that was during the late 80s, which is the George H.W. Bush time, very deregulatory. Even was deregulatory, under the early Clinton administration. So I really cut my teeth at the Media Access Project, first doing litigation, so arguing cases in front of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which is one step below the Supreme Court, although I filed Supreme Court briefs. And that kind of took me more into a policy direction, doing work on the Hill, obviously doing policy work at the FCC and other agencies, the Federal Trade Commission, Department of Commerce. So, communications law is obviously so tied up with the policy work that you really can't avoid it.
Mm-hmm. So I want to fast forward into a topic that I don't think is very pleasant for either one of us, but probably especially not for you. And your most recent didn't happen FCC appointment. So I will say I found those hearings to be appalling. I mean, I can't even put it like.
Imagine what I think.
I could. Well, I look forward to diving into it with you. I just. I mean, I do appreciate that you could laugh about it a little bit now. I don't know if you could right away, but so let's start at the beginning. When did you receive the news that you were the nominee? And for anyone not in the know listening to this, Gigi was the appointment to the FCC via the Biden administration that was going to give us a 3-2 net neutrality majority at the FCC, which a lot of us were very, very excited about. And then there was I think it was about 3 years when all was said and done process that
not that long, but it was 2 years. So
2 years.
So once. I did work for the Biden campaign in the spring and summer of 2020. And look, I already had a reputation. I had worked for Chairman Tom Wheeler, Barack Obama's second FCC chair, who was just fantastic. Best job I've ever had. And I started, kind of lining myself up. Like it's a full-time job to advocate for a Senate confirmed position like that. Mm-hmm. So, I started going through my very large Rolodex. I don't know if people still remember what a Rolodex is, but even before the president got elected and kind of sort of teed myself up as a possibility to be either a commissioner or the chair, either one. And as soon as President Biden got elected, I ramped that up considerably. And I mean, I basically had people, Republicans, Democrats, industry, just public interest, you name it, had everybody weigh in with the White House. And didn't hear anything until the end of May of 2021. So we're already almost 5 months into the administration. And
which is not common. Just to make it clear, like for people listening, that's not common. Usually this is a couple weeks. And when Trump was appointing people who I think had no qualifications whatsoever, I don't know how to put it, they were just approved within weeks. And then here you are, maybe among the most qualified people ever. And so continue.
But what made it worse, though, Ron, was that it was a 2-2 FCC.
Right.
So the Republicans, who are, I have to say, much more canny in these things than Democrats, got somebody on the commission, Commissioner Symington, very nice guy, completely with no knowledge of telecommunications or anything. To his credit, he's learned it, but not really qualified like I was qualified. They pushed him on in December of 2020. They basically rushed him on and caused the FCC to be stalemated. So that made the delay in getting me first vetted. So I was vetted in the end of May and June 2021. I passed with flying colors. I expected to be nominated in July, and I didn't get nominated until the end of October of 2021. So there was a 4-month delay between my papers going through the White House because they really didn't have many concerns. They knew I was a consumer advocate. They knew I had poked industry, but there really wasn't much in my, despite what my opponents made of it, not that much in my Twitter feed or in my history that gave them a lot of pause. They knew it was going to be a fight. So they waited 4 months to nominate me. Now, not just me, but also Alan Davidson, who holds a very, very important position in the Department of Commerce and is giving out, $42 billion for broadband deployment. So we were vetted around the same time and we were nominated at the same time. So I have no idea why it took them so long to nominate me, Alan, and they nominated Jessica Rosenworcel, who was already a commissioner, to be the chair. So that delay was a killer. Because because my name had appeared in the trade press and other places that I was a possibility, both, again, for the chair seat or the commissioner seat, that gave my opponents a lot of time to kind of, do whatever they do, right? Opposition research and what have you, and delay me. I didn't get a hearing until December 1, despite begging Senator Cantwell, who's the chair of the Commerce Committee, to allow me to go sooner, allow me to have a hearing with the chairwoman Rosenworcel. That she had hers in mid-November, but she pushed Alan and I off until December. And that gave industry enough time to push me to 2022. And because I didn't get a vote out of committee. So 2022 comes along and I figure, okay, I'm going to get my vote. I had to be renominated because it was a new year and a new Congress. Fine. And I expected, okay, I'm going to get my committee vote now. And then I find out I believe it was February of 2022, that I have to have another hearing. And I was like, why? And part of the problem here, to be fair, was it was a 50-50 Senate, right? So 50 Republicans, 50 Democrats. And I guess Senator Cantwell believed she had to, bargain with Senator Wicker from Mississippi, who was the ranking member at the time. So I have a second hearing. And while I think I did well, the attacks got nastier. Like my first hearing, I really cruised. And, some of the Democrats thought I would get Republican.
Interesting choice of words, by the way.
Yeah. So I have the second hearing. It goes relatively well, even though I was attacked. And it's interesting, speaking of cruised, in the first hearing, December of 2021, Senator Cruz was very respectful of me. I had met with him for 45 minutes because I had some very, very conservative supporters, including the CEO of Newsmax and the president of One America, right? Because I had worked with them trying to get them access to Comcast and Charter and other cable systems. So they really respected me, and they had talked to Senator Cruz. So he was very respectful. But then the second hearing, oh boy, he was not respectful at all. He really went for the jugular. The rumor is that Rupert Murdoch called him up and said, "What the hell are you doing?" But I have no way of proving that, but it would not surprise me. Anyone who reads the Wall Street Journal knows that Murdoch was out for my head from the very, very beginning.
Well, and I mean, let me run this by you. I think that somebody who is at Newsmax or OAN, even though my personal politics are completely different from theirs, as are yours, but I think they are likely to see the value of a free and open internet.
And they do.
Even despite those political differences.
They do. Chris Ruddy, the CEO of Newsmax, is pro net neutrality. Mm-hmm. So, things don't line up exactly as one might think. And while I was painted as this kind of crazy, wild-haired liberal who hated cops, I mean, the characterizations of me were just so out of line. And people would, from industry and from, whatever, say, Gigi, I know that's not you. But there was this dark money group called the American Association, American AAF, American Accountability Foundation, which is a very ironic name since they're not accountable to anybody and you can't find out who their donors are. They started launching Facebook ads. They put up billboards in Las Vegas. Yeah. They did digital ads. So they were spending, I mean, I can't quantify it. The most I could quantify was probably $500,000 just on Facebook ads. That doesn't count all the others. So they spent probably millions of dollars to defeat me and created this persona that just didn't exist. And how does the nominee can't fight that, right? The White House is like, no, you cannot speak to the press. And I get that, right? So I have my surrogates who are, a bunch of public interest advocates and others and, industry folks and who are, helping me as much as they could, but they had full-time jobs. While this group, put out a dossier on me. Well, what they did was they fed this dossier to the Fraternal Order of Police that I was some kind of cop hater based on a couple of tweets on retweets, not even my own tweets, like retweets and likes from the time, of George Floyd saying, that there needs to be police reform and police brutality is bad. I mean, none of these things were
very objectionable views. That's
right. Nothing objectionable and really mainstream Democrat, but they painted me out to be this crazy lefty liberal. And some of the pictures, like the caricatures of me, like in the Washington Times, my favorite, if I can say that. So I used to wear these bright red glasses, had me with these red glasses and this plug in my mouth that said FCC. And if you zoomed out, there was like a hammer and sickle on my forehead. Somewhat ironic, given where some of the Republicans are these days on Russia. But in any event, it came fast and furious. Like the first couple weeks had all these congratulatory messages, including from industry, broadcast industry and cable industry. Then the worm started to turn and you start to see all these editorials and ads. And it turned very quickly and it got particularly nasty. So 2022, I finally got a vote. And it was delayed. The vote was delayed. This was in March of 2022. It was delayed because Senator Lujan, who was the chair of the subcommittee, wonderful man, had a stroke at age 50. So we had to wait for him to come back. We had a vote. It was a tie vote on the committee, 14-14, which meant that I had to have an extra vote on the floor of the Senate in order to get confirmed. But that vote never came. And the vote never came because there were a couple of Democrats who decided they would rather have checks from Comcast for their reelection than vote for the president's nominee for the FCC. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And so I didn't get a vote in 2022. And I thought about withdrawing. I thought about hanging it up. But I was encouraged by Senator Cantwell and others. Stick it out until the lame duck session in December. When the lame duck session came and went now, Nobody in my position who needed 3 votes to get through got a vote in the lame duck. And then to my surprise, the White House says, we're renominating you for a 3rd time. This is nominating you for 3rd time, but renominating for a 2nd time. Yeah. And I was like, well, do you really think I can get over the finish line this time? They're like, sure. Well, that fell apart very quickly. I had to have a 3rd hearing, which was the worst.
Yes.
And the worst part about it was I felt like almost nobody among the Democrats defended me. Senator Markey did, Senator Cantwell did somewhat, but a lot of folks didn't show up. Now, some of them didn't show up because they were running for re-election and had already voted for me and didn't want to then, show that they were now lukewarm. And some didn't show up because they thought it was ridiculous that I had to have 3 hearings. I mean, what more was there to say? So, look, there were a lot of factors that went into this, but basically it was the power of industry and dark money that defeated my nomination. And it got very, very, very personal. There was a time around the 3rd hearing where I was actually concerned for my family's safety. And it's almost been a year now. March 7th will be the day I withdrew. And that was even screwed up because I had decided on a Monday that I was going to withdraw on that Tuesday. I told the White House, and I had just talked to the Washington Post, given them my statement. And, at 12 o'clock, I talked to the White House at 10. At 12 o'clock, Senator Manchin says, I'm not going to vote for her. She's horrible. She's partisan. It's like, I wasn't expecting his vote, and I was going to withdraw anyway. But so I couldn't even withdraw on my own terms. I had to have, Senator Manchin, who's not even running for re-election. How ironic is that?
Yeah.
But he didn't, he wanted to take credit for scotching my nomination. But the fact of the matter is didn't need his vote. But, there were other Democrats still kind of sitting on the fence. So then they wouldn't say one way or another. And that's kind of maddening. Like, my mother had a phrase, shit or get off the pot. Like, if you're going to oppose me, then just oppose me. But they didn't have the courage to do that. And I think that's unfortunate.
That 3rd hearing, I mean, I live streamed that hearing for Status Quo News, and it was it felt as if Ted Cruz had rehearsed every statement a million times in the mirror. And what little defense you had, which I agree with you, was very insufficient and disappointing to see. It sounded like a high schooler who forgot to read the book but had to present in front of the class anyway. And I just was so and not everyone. I mean, there were a few testimonies that I felt did a good job, kind of summarizing the whole issue. But for the most part, it was just so ridiculous to see. And it was just one of those things where you're just, how is this our politics? Like this is just, well, we know how, but it was just so ridiculous to watch. And then of course they ended up getting what they wanted, which was you, leaving your a bit like, withdrawing. That was the word I was looking for, withdrawing your nomination, which was so frustrating to see. And I think it's literally made history as far as it took this long for an appointment. And it's, I mean, I think the closest was Nixon at one point, right? Or
yeah, I don't, that I try not to think about, who else, what the record was. But yeah, I mean, the fact that I had to start in October and the problem is, one of the problems of the many problems is that we have a 24-hour election cycle now. Right. So if I had been nominated, let's say in March or April, I wouldn't have been caught up in the 2022s who were worried about getting reelected. So this is, Senator Cortez Masto was kind of the leader of the pack, and Senator Kelly, he was in it. So there's a couple of these Democrats who, wanted, like I said, wanted those checks to keep coming on in. And if I was having a vote in, September, a final vote, or let's say a committee vote in May or April, it would have been much different than, having a committee vote in March of 2022. So the delay, and the White House is to blame, but also Senator Cantwell is to blame as well, because she didn't give me a vote she could have given me a vote in 2021, a committee vote, but she didn't. She blamed it on Senator Sinema. I have no idea whether that was true or not, but at a certain point, you just have to kind of put the pedal to the metal and call the question. And if they wanted to vote against me, then I would at least I would have known, right? Yeah. But I kept kind of being, told that you still have a chance, stick it out. Obviously, my public interest colleagues wanted me to stick it out, because I do think, while my replacement is a perfectly qualified person, it doesn't have the same, it's not going to push the envelope like I would have pushed the envelope. And I think the agency has been very cautious, has been doing some good stuff. I don't want to take that away, but it's been doing also the bare minimum. And I compare that with what Lena Khan is doing at the FTC, and she went very early, right? She was nominated right off the bat, I think in February. And she is using the full power of her office to do good for the public. And I really admire her for that. But I will also say her nomination as a commissioner and then elevation after she was confirmed to chair did not help me at all. Because that became the rumor, was that I was going to be confirmed as a commissioner. And even though they'd already confirmed Jessica Roseworth as the chair, that I was somehow going to replace her, which made no sense. And I think one of the killers was, this was in early 2023, there was a Fox Business News story that people close to Sohn said that the only reason she's sticking it out this long is because President Biden promised her she'd be chair. I mean, it's just a lie. It's a flat out lie. But how do you push back against that? How do I push? I'm the only person with knowledge of this, but I can't say anything. So again, it was a perfectly bad storm of Democratic weakness and Republican and dark money uber aggressiveness that kind of scotched everything.
Yeah, I mean, just watching the smear campaign was just an amazing sight to behold. Like a lot of us were on the sidelines, like wondering how we could help. Like I even thought, I was just like, what if I just went like, hey, look, Gigi Sohn is not a radical leftist. I am. So she's not a radical leftist. She just has some that like her, because we know she'll be great at the FCC.
Well, the worst here was really the worst. The Fox Business News piece was bad and probably put the final nail in the coffin. But the worst was, and this is where I thought the White House had a real opportunity to sort of get the troops together, this was in January of 2023. And let me tell you something, the industry was so pissed that I got renominated. Mm-hmm. The industry and their surrogates, right? And they have a whole bunch of surrogate organizations, and not necessarily dark money organizations, but, other organizations. It's a long history. And to their credit, they give lots of money to so-called civil rights organizations and other nonprofits, and then expect a return, and they get a return. But the worst was, this was a weekend in January. It was actually my daughter was in a competition. She was in junior ROTC in high school. And I'm watching this competition, and this pops up on my phone. Is simultaneous stories on Fox News and the Daily Mirror. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sohn sits on board of organization that opposes limits on online sex trafficking. Right. Mm-hmm. And this is referring to the Electronic Frontier Foundation's opposition to a law which actually hurt prosecution of online sex trafficking, with which the Donald Trump DOJ, Department of Justice, actually agreed with that assessment, and the GAO agreed with that assessment. The second one, the Daily Mirror, was worse. It was like, Sohn sits on board of organization that honors dominatrix. And there's a picture of me next to this woman, in scantily clothed woman in lingerie. And then if you scroll down the end of the story, there's a picture scraped from Facebook of my wife and I, which I thought was completely and totally, it had nothing to do with anything other than to say, oh, look at this lesbian sexual pervert.
Yeah.
And I called the White House. I said, look, I don't normally bother you since these attacks seem to come almost daily, but this one's beyond the pale. And I thought that this would be the rallying point to get the Democrats to say, okay, this is ridiculous. Let's get her over the finish line. And it never happened. It never happened.
Yeah, and it should have been the rallying cry, and it's a shame it wasn't. I mean, for those of us, and look, I mean, I campaign with Fight for the Future. I have a good relationship with the EFF and with Free Press, and so. Yeah, seeing those smears, especially, as somebody who follows these policies, so sees through the kind of propaganda around them, and sees, no, this is actually what this policy would do. This isn't about keeping kids safe online. This is about making it harder for LGBTQ youth. That's what this is really about,
right.
And it'll make everyone less safe online. Those just very lazy tropes. It seems like they're just never ending, and we're always just kind of fighting back against it.
Yeah. Well, and look, and there was an army of online trolls just ready to attack and amplify. Some of the Koch brothers groups. They have big megaphones, and I got a lot of support from the other side, but it just can't be. You can't match an American Accountability Foundation multi-million-dollar campaign. We don't have those kind of resources.
Well, so let's move on to some, like, a little bit post that experience. But before we get off it, so how was it for you, like on a personal level, like just anything you want to share? I mean, you can kind of laugh about it now, which is great, but I mean, did you have a moment where you just sort of wanted to unplug for a while, or?
Oh yeah, and I did for a couple of months. I mean, look, it was almost every day. The rumor mill. The White House is going to ask her to withdraw, which, by the way, they never did, and they wouldn't. Like they don't do that. Oh, this one's going to come out against her. That one's going to. It's like every single day. So I was completely stressed out, anxiety. I actually was down to like 113 pounds, which I hadn't been since like middle school. I had lost a lot of weight. I mean, it was awful. And it was awful. It was awful for my family. Also was, look, I did what I could do to defend myself and talk to my surrogates who were helping me out. But for the most part, I was sitting around twiddling my thumbs. I don't want to say I was bored, because there was nothing about boring about being attacked in the Wall Street Journal and Fox News every other day. But I wanted to do the work. And I loved working at the FCC. I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed working for Tom Wheeler. I loved being on the inside, and I really wanted to do it again. So, I mean, I knew that I wasn't going to be an easy path to the nomination because of my advocacy, not because of my the way I've behaved, because I think everybody likes me. I'm a nice person. And I've always, even my, adversaries, if I was going to file something against them in public knowledge, I'd give them a heads up. So everybody really respected me. So I didn't expect the kind of vitriol. And I know there are people who would have called themselves my friends, who were part of it. And I didn't expect that. That was a surprise to me, that people who I'd worked with, who even right before my nomination, who I'd worked with closely, who I'd had conversations with, would work so hard to keep me off the commission. Now, in some ways, it's flattering, right? Because they're obviously scared to death of me, even though, again, I wasn't being nominated to be the chair, and all power really in that agency is in the chair. But I know I would have really had a huge platform to push the commission to do things that were more progressive. I still have that platform, but it's not necessarily the same.
Well, I mean, again, I'm sorry that you went through that. I mean, it's a horrible thing politically, professionally, personally, what you had to go through, and just so sad to see on every level. But we do have that, pro net neutrality FCC. Do you think we're going to get net neutrality back federally before the next presidential election?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think we're going to get it very soon, and we will get FC. We will get I think more importantly, the FCC will reinstate its authority to regulate the broadband industry, right? This is, finding that broadband is a telecommunications service under Title II. That's good. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm a little disappointed that all the FCC or all the FCC majority has decided to do at this point is just repeat what we did in 2015.
Right.
That's 8 years ago, almost 9 years, right? 9 years ago, really, because we adopted the rules. We adopted the rules in February of 2015. A lot has changed since then. So I was hoping for something that was a little bit more forward looking as far as the rules were concerned. But I do think that the reinstatement of FCC authority to, protect against privacy violations, to protect against fraud, to, make sure people aren't getting price gouged. I think that's in a lot of ways even more important than the rules. The rules are important. Don't get me wrong. I've spent much of my career fighting for them, but the reinstatement of authority, that is a big deal.
Absolutely. So, well, let's get into broadband then, because that's what you're veering into now, which is very exciting to see. I'm a big municipal broadband advocate myself. So first, define in your own words, what is municipal broadband?
So I like to use the term public broadband because I think that encompasses. So basically, public broadband is where a community or members of a community own the infrastructure. They may not build it themselves. They may not operate it themselves. In fact, that's more the model these days, where basically a community, pays a construction company to build, and then has an ISP operated for them. Sometimes it's usually the smaller ISPs operated for them, but they own the infrastructure and they control the price. They control that it gets to everybody. And they can make decisions about the use of that network that's in the public interest. And they're rather than looking at just return on investment. So it's all about local ownership. So co-ops, which are, come out of the electricity business, right? So rural electrification in Franklin Roosevelt's time, the Rural Electrification Act created all these cooperatives, which are members of a community joining together to provide electricity. About 200 of them now also provide broadband. So co-ops are definitely public broadband. And you do have what I call pure municipal broadband, which is like a Chattanooga, Tennessee, or a Lafayette, Louisiana, where they already had an electric utility and they just provided broadband as well. But that increasingly is the minority, and the majority is sort of these, what you'd call public-private partnerships, where a town says, okay, Utopia Fiber or Bonfire Fiber, you build the network, you design and build the network for me, and either it'll be what they call open access, where you can invite many ISPs to provide service. That's really Utopia's model. In most of the places it's at. Some of the other places where Utopia operates, they actually do operate the last mile. Or we'll just be the exclusive ISP, but again, you own the infrastructure. And that gives a community a lot of power to do the right thing.
So talk about the organization that you're with now.
So I'm executive director of an organization called the American Association for Public Broadband. And we basically, again, represent locally owned broadband networks, community broadband networks. And I've been working a lot defending the model because, interestingly, ever since I took the helm of AAPB in June of last year, there have been increasing attacks on community broadband because they're becoming extremely popular and extremely successful. Yeah. So most of my time over the past year has been defending attacks in Massachusetts, in Kentucky, in Utah, in Michigan, and I expect that there will be many more. I also spent a lot of time working on a kind of a very weedy issue, but one that's important for my members, and I think a lot of small ISPs, period, was trying to make it easier for smaller ISPs to get some of the $42.5 billion the National Telecommunications Information Administration is giving for broadband deployment. So they have a program called the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. They're giving out money to the states. They haven't given all the money to the states yet, but they're going to be giving all that money to the states. And the NTIA had this requirement that not only that an applicant provide a 25% match for the grant, but also they provide a 25% letter of credit. And that was really going to just drive any public broadband entity that had a chance out of the running, and frankly, any female or minority-owned ISP or any small ISP. So I basically helped to organize 300 signatories to a letter, and the NTIA provided alternatives. It listened to us, to their credit, and they provide a bunch of alternatives. So now the smaller entities are going to be able to participate, which I think is important because the rules, unfortunately, I think are a little weighted towards the big guys anyway, just because there's a lot of requirements that the little guys can't. But this was very, very helpful. So basically, I want to promote the model, and we're about to come out just next week. I don't know when this is going to air, but March 6th. Mark it on your calendar. We're going to come out with basically a how-to public broadband handbook, because there are dozens of communities that are looking at this model because they're dissatisfied with the service that they're getting from incumbents. So this is how do you finance? How do you build community support? What's the checklist? So that's going to come out on March 6th. So I want to promote, I've told people my goal is to double the number of public broadband entities in the next 5 years. About 650 now. I'm putting 1,500 is my goal.
Well, I mean, it's an issue that I've been, fighting for in various communities that I've lived in. And it's just, going big picture, it's very clear that the internet is a utility in our lives. People need it. And as we're living in a society where, the FTC came up in our conversation. As of the recording of this today, they're, trying to stop the Kroger Albertsons merger, yes, which would make our groceries even more expensive than they already are. So, I mean, getting to the point where internet is viewed as a public good and is treated as such around the country would just be a huge, huge, huge win for everybody. And it certainly wouldn't solve every societal problem we have, but it would certainly be a huge, huge victory that would make a very big impact in people's daily lives.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think everybody considers broadband a utility. Mm-hmm. But if you say that in D.C., they immediately move to, you want rate regulation, you want to regulate it as a utility. And maybe I think it needs more regulation. Whether it should be regulated like electric and water, I'm not sure. But it certainly is a utility to the extent that it can't just be open to the quote unquote free market. Right. There needs to be greater government oversight, and local governments should be able to build these networks and run them and own them if they want to. And that's part of the problem. So I talked about, I want to promote more of these. I want to defend the model against attacks. And like I said, there have been a lot of attacks, particularly against networks that are affiliated with some of my board members. So interesting coincidence. And I want to make sure they have fair access to funding. So there are 17 states still that have restrictions on public entities building broadband networks, right? Not so much co-ops, but local governments owning their own networks. And I have this crazy idea that no more BEAD money should go to any state that has a restriction on public broadband. Now, here's what's interesting. The bipartisan infrastructure law says that states cannot refuse to give grants to what they call non-traditional internet service providers. And that includes co-ops, public broadband, local government broadband, municipal broadband. It says it in the statute. And that's the rules that NTIA has laid out. But here's the problem. What good is it? And every state that has a restriction says, if you're a government, you want to apply for money, have at it, but you can't build there. So what good is that?
Yes.
So I don't expect NTIA to start preempting state laws as much as I would like them to. But I think somebody should introduce a bill that basically says no more bead money unless you get rid of these restrictions. Because otherwise the requirement that states give money or allow these entities to apply is completely worthless.
So in closing, where can people go to learn more about you, more about the organization, and where can people go to get this handbook?
So aapb.us is the website. We just put up a brand new website. I need more members, so please join. And the handbook will be on the website. Hopefully it should be on there on March 6th. And if anybody is interested in learning more about AAPB, and by the way, I'm doing a bunch of other work as well, trying to save the Affordable Connectivity Program, and I'm also building some statewide coalitions around broadband. But for AAPB, my email address is gsohn, SOHN, at aapb.us. And I hope people will join. And if people have any questions, they should feel free to email me, and I'm happy to talk about it all day long, because I agree with you. I think this is a model whose time has come, and cities and towns are sick of having to deal with companies that don't want to provide universal access, whose prices are high, and who are just not providing the level of customer service that a locally owned ISP would.
Well, Gigi, thank you so much for doing this. I've always been a big admirer of your work, and I'm very, very stoked for this new chapter for you.
Well, good. Thanks a lot, Ron. This is really a pleasure.
That was Gigi Sohn, aapb.us. Check it out. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxon. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Bay Watching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support the show on the sustainability end, you can do so over at patreon.com/romplacone. For Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of cool perks, full stand-up sets not available anywhere else. Drew and I actually did some on-the-ground coverage of the of a commemorative event in San Pedro. That's up now for the patrons. And all the virtual screenings of Left It While I'm going to do, it is free for patrons. So if you become a patron, you can attend any virtual screening you want for free. That's patreon.com/romplacone. Oh, and a special shout out this week, by the way. You may remember Todd Hibbler, episode 13. Todd has a career in the Renaissance Festival circuit. Well, his project, his big culinary project, is going to be featured on the Food Network. So his food stand is going to be featured on the Food Network. And Anthony Rankin, episode 15, who's also one of my best friends, he recently performed on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. So, man, if you want to get higher level TV gigs, you got to do 1000 first. Apparently that's the case. See y'all next week. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1000 is doing for me, and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.